Welcome to episode 1 of my studio redo. I want to first show you what it looked like before we started. So enter if you dare. Here's what I put together 4 years ago on the cheap. I had way too much equipment in this room, and I used some old cabinetry that I had, an old dresser that I used for a keyboard stand to hold my Korg N1, my drum kit, a variable height desk that I purchased from Home Depot to hold the monitor and the keyboard. Originally, I had a 42-inch TV between those speakers and took it down. Here's my console that I bought back in the mid-90s. And then some cabinetry I built above it to hold my equipment. You can see most of it's gone because it's been on the road with me. And so here's a few of my guitars hanging on the wall. And some of my amps. And then a cubby hole back here with just a bunch of junk in it. And there's my Marshall amp and speaker. There just wasn't enough space to get everything in the room the way I wanted it, and the desk never did work out right. The drum kit, as you can see, takes up a ton of space, and I really didn't use it. Only had one of my keyboards in there. Just my Korg. I've collected a few more keyboards and a synthesizer since then, so I needed more space for keyboards, so I decided to get rid of the drum kit. So there you can see my computer sitting off to the side of the keyboard. You'll see there's some speakers back behind the drum kit that weren't being used, and a little mixer I used for live events sitting on top that wasn't being used. And there's my bass bins taking up a ton of space, and with turntables on top, only really used one of those. So it was time to redo. It was time to get rid of the stuff that I wasn't using and make room for the things that I wanted to use. Here's my conga drums. That's a new addition. Here's my console, a Mackie SR32-4 that I bought back in There's my tower computer and monitor. The speakers that I've used forever and a day. I've since upgraded. You'll see those at the end. My touchscreen monitor that I thought would work really well and honestly doesn't. It just wears your arms out. Here's a closer up of some of my guitars. That zebra wood guitar I built from a kit. One of my basses. There's my Fender tin top. And you can see back in the corner is my PV Raptor. Here's my first ever acoustic guitar. My first electric, the Jackson, there next to it. And there's my Fender Strat and my custom head, and underneath it my PV tube head. Two really great amps that I picked up for a really good price. But as you can see, it's a mess. There is stuff everywhere. There's my Marshall with the Marshall speaker 4x12 underneath of it. Some of my studio lights, music stands, all my music back on the bookshelves, and just a bunch of junk stacked behind. Most of my albums are in those cardboard boxes, and you can see my CDs on the shelf and just miscellaneous stuff. There's the top of the bass bins with my bongos and my turntables and my Elmo and my Fluffy dolls and my old gumball machine. And you can see the bass bins just kind of became a catch-all for all sorts of stuff because they weren't being used for anything else. There's a couple more guitars still in the cases and a microphone down there. And just stuff everywhere. It's time to clean it up and organize it. So here we are out in the driveway getting ready to make the template for the desk. That's a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, and I'm going to lay everything out on that and make one pattern and then transfer it because I've got 8 sides to build, and I want all of them to be exactly the same. So I'll do a pattern with the 1/4-inch, get it looking just exactly like I want it, and then I can transfer it to some 3/4-inch plywood that I inherited off of a job site that was going to be thrown away, and that's what we're going to build this desk out of. So here we are starting to measure things out. It ended up I could get 3 sides out of a 4x8 sheet of plywood. So it took a little over 2.5 sheets of plywood just to do the sides. So quite a bit to it here. We're going to skip ahead, and I don't want to bore you with an hour of just doing layout here. So we're going to cut that thing in half so it's a little easier to deal with, and then I'll use half of it to make my pattern. So, okay, we've got it cut in half, and we're going to start laying things out. I had spent a ton of time trying to come up with a design that I liked. Spent a lot of time on Pinterest and manufacturers' websites looking at desks, and nothing really suited me. Nothing worked for me. I needed a lot of space for my outboard gear that I've collected over the years, and I don't want it in a rack that's down on the floor where I've got to get down on my knees to use it. So I wanted everything angled from the top of the desk, and in the center, I wanted my console, and underneath my console, I wanted a drawer for my MIDI controller / keyboard, and then above the console, I'm going to hang a 42-inch monitor. So I've got lots of screen space. One of the worst things when you're working with a DAW, in my opinion, is not having enough screen space to get everything up where you can see it. And it just, oh well. I've tried to work with my DAW on my laptop. That just doesn't work. Everything's way too small. I moved over for a time. I had a 42-inch television in the old studio, and it worked really well. But it's hard. You have to have a wall to mount it on. And with the way I'm going to move my desk around, it's going to be a challenge. And being on the road, working off a plastic folding table, there was no way I could use that 42-inch television. So I ended up buying a 27-inch touchscreen monitor, and I thought that would be a really great way to go. I saw the Slate Audio desk with the touchscreen monitors and said, yeah, that'll work. That's great. So I found this thing on eBay, really cheap, and tried it. And quite honestly, it's a good monitor, but when you start trying to edit with a touchscreen monitor, one, you have to keep adjusting it because there's so much glare on it. And two, your arms get tired of hitting the buttons all the time. And I found that even though it was touchscreen, I still ended up using my mouse most of the time. So the touchscreen idea just didn't work, and I've decided to go back to a regular 42, 43-inch monitor to use for my DAW, and the touchscreen is going to end up on another computer that's hooked up to my synthesizer. I've got a Behringer DeepMind 12, and Behringer gives you some great software to run on your computer that allows you to bypass all the menu diving on the synthesizer and have a nice big screen to adjust things. And the touchscreen, I think, will work great for that. So that's the plan. So I've spent probably 2 years thinking about this and playing with different things and trying to figure out just exactly what I wanted. So we're going to lay it out and we're going to see how it works. So follow along. I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. Okay, one of the things that I was worried about when I was designing this desk is, like I said, I wanted all of my outboard equipment to be above the desktop and angled. But I also wanted to be able to set speakers on top of these cabinets. And I didn't want the speakers to be too high. I wanted to try to keep them in that sweet spot where the center of the speakers is pretty much the same height as your ears. So I was concerned about how high everything was going to be and what angle I was going to have to be at. I ended up, let's see, these are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12 unit, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 spaces on each of the angled portions of the rack. So I didn't know quite what angle. I had messed with some stuff, trying different angles and looking at different desks, and some of them just tend to be way too flat. Some of them are too steep, so I ended up kind of in the middle. It's about a 30-degree angle, and finished now. The angle is just about right. If they were steeper, they'd probably be a little more convenient, but then my speakers would be too high. And if they were flatter, you just can't see things. It just doesn't work. So I just kind of played around with it, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So as you can see here, we're taking our time laying out this pattern, trying to get all the angles right. And The next thing we're going to do some curves on the back and on the front to kind of give it a little bit of design. I didn't want just a square box. I wanted something that looked a little nicer than that, a little more professional. So let's skip ahead and I'll show you how that went together. Okay, so here we are bringing the string out. We've got two curves, two arcs that we're going to do. One is on the back. That's the one that I'm doing right here. That runs basically from about 3 inches off the floor to about 3 inches from the top. And so the way I did it is once I had that back line, the straight line in, I'm going to put a screw on each end of the where I want that arc to start and to finish. And then I'm going to stretch a string between those two screws. And by varying the tension on the string, I can vary the tension on the arc and change the radius of that arc. Used to do a lot of houses back in the day, and people loved arches in their house, and this is the way I found to do it that worked very, very well and gave you a nice arch. It's a little sharper arc on the ends and a little more gentle in the middle, and people were always happy with it. So here we are stretching the string across, and then you'll see me with my pencil as I just run it along with the string and get my arc. So that looked pretty good. So I'll take the string off and pull the screws. Now we're going to do the one on the front, which goes just from about 2 inches off the floor up underneath the desktop and underneath the supports that hold the desktop. There's also going to be some drawers on underneath the desktop, and then, of course, in the middle is going to be a drawer that's going to hold my MIDI controller. So we've got to make all that work. So there we go. We got it pretty much laid out. Next step is grab the jigsaw and start cutting. Okay, getting the jigsaw hooked up, getting ready to start cutting. And here we go, very carefully following the lines. Once I get it all cut out, then I'll go back and sand that edge, and make it just exactly the way I want it, because we'll be using this. This is our pattern for the rest of them, and we'll actually be using this pattern to do the final edge cut with a router on the actual plywood sides. So we'll skip ahead now. I don't want to bore you with watching me cut all this out. So here we go. Okay, making the final cut there on the right, you can see the legs and the bottom, where the bottom shelf is going to be about 2 inches above the floor. The legs are about 3 inches long. So there we go. There's the side. There's what it's going to look like. Came out pretty good. And surprisingly, there wasn't a whole lot of sanding that needed to be done on that to get it ready to use to cut out the rest. Here you can see I'm measuring. I'm a little concerned about how deep everything is. I was worried that it wasn't all going to fit in my room. Unfortunately, this is a small room that I'm in. And while I'm not tied up against the walls, I've only got about a foot on each side. So it's tough to get behind everything. But we make it work and we move on. And I'll see you in the next episode.